Alright, since we are now familiar with different schools of economic thought, let's also take a look at the lasting influence of those on political ideologies. Undeniably, it has had a profound impact throughout history. Economic theories have often been the intellectual backbone for political systems, shaping policies, institutions, and social structures. Accordingly, here is an overview of the historical influence and the current relevance of these economic schools on political ideologies. It comes in handy to use the tree that was presented in the introduction to scrutinize these aspects. Let's start with classical economics and liberalism. As we heard in the beginning of this course, the key thinkers were Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and John Stuart Mill. To reiterate what was presented, classical economics rooted in the ideas of Adam Smith, giving rise to the political ideology of classical liberalism. Smith's idea of the invisible hand suggested that free markets, driven by individual self-interest, would naturally lead to societal prosperity. This supported a laissez-faire approach to government, promoting minimal intervention in markets. Therefore, classical liberalism argued for free trade, individual liberty, private property, and limited government. What about the current relevance? The ideas of classical economics are foundational to modern neoliberalism and libertarianism, which argue for deregulation, low taxes, and privatization. Neoliberal policies, particularly dominant in the late 20th century, think of Thatcherism in the UK and Reaganomics in the US, continue to influence many aspects of global economic policy, including the role of international financial institutions like the IMF or the World Bank. Let's continue with Marxist economics and socialism and communism. What was the political influence here? Marx's critique of capitalism and his labor theory of value laid the foundation for socialist and communist ideologies. According to Marx, capitalism was inherently exploitative, and the working class, the so-called proletariat, would eventually raise up to overthrow the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie. His ideas influenced, of course, the revolutionary socialism in the light of Leninism and Maoism, the creation of planned economies in the Soviet Union, China, and other communist countries. The push for worker ownership of the means of production in various socialist movements. However, by looking at its current relevance, while Soviet-style communism has largely collapsed and disappeared, Marxist ideas continue to influence many left-wing movements, particularly in terms of critiques of income inequality, labor rights, and corporate power. Democratic socialism, as seen in contemporary movements, for example Bernie Sanders in the US and some elements of European politics, emphasizes that state intervention, wealth distribution, and welfare policies often were inspired by Marx's critique of capitalism. Alright, next, let's continue with the neoclassical branch of our tree. To refresh the names of the key thinkers, Alfred Marshall, William Stanley Jevons, and Léon Walras. Neoclassical economics, which builds on classical theories with focus on marginal utility and market equilibrium, has influenced the political ideology of economic conservatism. This ideology promotes similar, like the classical liberal economists, free markets, private enterprise, and limited government intervention. Let's also point out this sub-branch of the neoclassical framework, the New Classical Framework. In the US, Reaganomics and supply-side economics drew heavily from the neoclassical ideas, emphasizing tax cuts, deregulation, and reducing government spending on welfare programs to encourage economic growth. With regards to its current relevance, Neoclassical and new classical economics remains influential in mainstream economic thought, particularly among conservative political parties that champion free market policies and oppose heavy government regulation. Supply-side economics continues to shape policies, especially regarding taxation and deregulation in many countries, even though the great financial crisis heavily discredited some of its principles. Let's continue with Keynes. Keynesian economics and welfare state liberalism. What was his political influence? Keynes' critique of classical economics, particularly during the Great Depression, led to the rise of Keynesianism, which advocated for government intervention to smooth out the booms and busts of the business cycle. His ideas underpinned the creation of the welfare state in many Western countries after World War II. Politically, this influenced social democracy, a blend of market capitalism with government intervention to ensure social welfare, for example, universal health care, unemployment insurance, and these kind of programs. The New Deal in the US under Franklin D. Roosevelt, as well as post-war economic policies in Europe where government took an active role in regulating economies and providing public services. With regards to its current relevance, while Keynesianism was overshadowed by neoliberalism in the late 20th century, it made a resurgence during the 2008 financial crisis as governments around the world adopted stimulus packages to prevent a deeper recession. Today, many policymakers use Keynesian ideas, particularly regarding fiscal stimulus during recessions and the importance of government intervention in stabilizing economics. As we heard in this course, the Keynesian framework was further extended by his disciples, incorporating concepts from the new classical economic framework to form actually the new Keynesian framework. One could say the overall political ideology, however, can be seen as a continuation of Keynes' perspectives when it comes to the political realm. After emphasizing on Keynes, let's continue with the Austrians. The Austrian school and libertarianism. As we heard, the key thinkers were Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich August von Hayek. The political influence championed free markets, individual liberty, and skepticism of government intervention. Hayek in particular argued that central planning was inherently flawed to the impossibility of gathering sufficient information to make rational economic decisions. These ideas profoundly influenced libertarianism, which advocates for minimal state intervention, free markets, and individual freedom. Libertarianism based on Austrian economics remains a strong ideological force, particularly in the US. It influences debates on taxation, regulation, and government size. In countries like the US, Ron Paul and the Tea Party movement have been vocal proponents of these ideas, opposing government bailouts and advocating for market-driven solutions. After looking at the influence of the Austrian school of economics, let's also take a look at monetarism, as they share quite a lot in the political realm. Monetarism and its strong association with the Chicago school and neoliberalism. The Chicago school of economics, led by Milton Friedman, was central to the rise of neoliberalism. Friedman argued for the primacy of the free markets and the dangers of government intervention, advocating for the control of the money supply to manage inflation. Deregulation and privatization of public services and reduction in government spending, especially in social programs. When it comes to the current relevance, neoliberalism, based on Chicago school economics, became the dominant ideology in the late 20th century, influencing policymakers like Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the US. Its principles are still influential today, especially in international financial institutions and in globalization, where free trade and market liberalization are key components of policy. Let's now look at the contemporary economic thought. behavioral economics and modern governments. Beforehand or momentarily, we elaborated on the ideas of Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler. What is their political influence? Behavioral economics, which focuses on the psychological aspects of economic decision making, has influenced a new form of governments that uses nudge policies. These policies aim to subtly guide people toward better decisions without eliminating their freedom of choice. For example, governments use default options to encourage savings. For example, automatic enrollment in retirement plans. That means that individuals have to opt out actively to not participate in those retirement plans. Furthermore, framing effects and choice architecture are applied in public health companies. For example, placing healthier food options at eye level. As we can see, its current relevancy, behavioral economics has become a vital tool in modern governments, influencing public policy, especially in areas like health, finance, and retirement planning. Its approach is used to tackle problems such as climate change, pension savings, and public health crisis. In conclusion, economic schools of thought continue to shape political ideologies and influence governance worldwide. The interplay between the schools and their political applications remains a key driver of policy making, with modern challenges such as climate change, inequality, and technological disruption prompting fresh interpretation of these established economic ideas.